Well, the markets collapse with Vixpiration this week. It is options X. Lot to discuss here. Critical week historically for the market. And you can see here the futures closed, flat to positive. On the E-mini, up about 3 points and basically a throwaway session. They will open here in about 15 minutes for Tuesday's price action. Of course, a shortened week here with the holiday. Hope everybody got some rest there. But we'll discuss a few things. So right now, obviously, we've been talking about this. We've been in a very, very tight range. At 200 points for day traders, quite a bit of a range. But in terms of the market movement and overall, very tight. Big squeeze 2 Fridays ago. No follow through. Big sell, into the end of the week. But ultimately, no damage, no changes here. And a lot has been talked about here as far as where's the market going to go? Technology. Do we have a kind of confirmed lower high here on the NQ? And this is going to be critical this week, NQ specifically, because you have that potential for the lower high here. You do have the 200, which was hit, and you can see the bull market trend line going back to 2023. Again, right there, we did reject that, to be fair. So you do have that in trouble. However, we still have that heavy dispersion out there we've talked about time and time again here. The Russell, still closing green on Friday, as did the Dow, or at least flattish. So heavy dispersion out there. Sectors like XLP, XLV, XLE, heck, even the transports, regional banks, holding up very well, even as, the XLF, traditional fins, in a little bit of trouble here. And of course, XLK, record short interest there, by the way. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want to dive into this a little bit here. So yes, it is OPEX week. And you do have a market here that, struggled to get anything going and has struggled to hold gains that we've had. You still have an inside bar here, technically. But it's a weak market, and I guess, a good bear argument here is that, what's left to rally on. And the fact that we haven't followed through is certainly a fair point. But I do want to talk about this whole Vixpiration dynamic here. So this phenomenon has really come into prominence mainstream-wise over the last year. But let's just get a few things here before we get too excited, because I'm hearing a lot of talk about it. First of all, we could resolve to the downside. I'm not making this video to sit here and tell you we can't do that. But I am saying that I've never seen a market before, and I'll just use the SPX, it's a little bit cleaner. I've never seen a market 2 years in a row do the same exact thing at the same exact time of the year. Last year we had that big pop, election, pullback, slight higher high, sell off, bounce, lower low, slight higher high, chop, slight higher high, topped on Vixpiration, and then dumped 25%. Same thing here, right? Sell, and the only difference is like 2 weeks sooner, right? Big sell, higher high, pullback, lower low, higher high, chop, higher high, and now we're into Vixpiration week. I've never seen it. We're not talking about a seasonal pattern here where we pulled back like 3% in September, or we bottomed in March or something like that. I'm talking about like the exact same pattern. And so my kind of thought here is, if it does resolve to the downside, it's not going to look anything like this, and it may be a lot more shallow than that. So just bear that in mind for starters. But as far as Vixpiration is concerned here, I just want to make sure everyone understands. All that means is there's a delta on options is a little bit more sensitive because it's earlier in the expiry cycle, right? The week and a half before the expiry, we know that the market's more likely to be pinned, and essentially that's all that is. Now, why this is important is oftentimes we see a spot or a period of weakness and air pocket around these big expiries because there aren't downside hedges. However, implied volatilities, you can see VVIX right now. If we just kind of zoom in here and go across, compare it with the actual VIX, it's currently it rallied Friday. This is showing the VIX. So apologies here. This is showing the VIX today, but VIX was down Friday. VVIX was up. There was, hedging risk into the weekend, right? There was geopolitical fears. There was a government shutdown. It's not as if traders are not buying. We saw a put-call ratio spike over 1 on Friday. We also have current setup here on the NASDAQ, right? Hedge funds, really not long the NASDAQ right now. Retail dumping longs as well, with banks buying into this weakness here. So it's not as if this market here is unhedged. And going into Vixpiration, right? It's not as if, if we're selling off, right, for instance, 2 or 3 days before Vixpiration, do you think that there's going to be no hedges past the next 2-3 days? Of course there will be, right? So it's not like an automatic, Vixpiration happened, so we have to drop to 15%. No, if that were the case, we would puke every month, right? So very, very important to understand that. And this is not sneaking up on anybody. There's not much alpha in it anymore, and it's a lot of the time we bottom on Vixpiration or the day after, I think, because it's a known thing. So something to just consider going into this week. Also, I've said this before, but regardless of which way this breaks, it's going to be ugly, and most people are going to get killed trying to trade it, whether that's up or down. So some things to consider here. We've already talked about the ES levels on Friday. 68.95 big level for the bulls to clear in order to get a squeeze going. Did see a little bit of interest at 6750 for today. Some open interest change, and 6900. We might be in a little range, but we could test the low end there. So watch those numbers as we get into the futures here. General lean is, I think we could see a possible rebound, and then we'll kind of go from there. But first level here is 6895. Once that's cleared, we should get a little bit of a squeeze going. It's not the bottom, but from there, I think we could retest some of these breakdown pivots. But we will talk about that in the daily wrap-ups as always. So if you guys want that, subscribe to the channel. Come find me on carnivoretrades.com. We'll see you guys all tomorrow.